He knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is going to be the last multi-character centered video in this little marathon here, since this is pretty much my second to last Superman marathon video right here, and today I'm going to be talking about two more obscure Superman villains that I actually find to be a little underrated. I'm going to be talking about Kenny Braverman, aka the Conduit, and Atlas, a Jack Kirby creation from a long forgotten era. So let's get into it. The first character I'll be talking about here is Kenny Braverman, aka the Conduit. Kenny Braverman was a villain who was introduced in the early 90s in Superman the Man of Steel #0, and he was created by writer Dan Jurgens. And his origins go something like this. On the night where young Kal-El's spaceship landed in Smallville, it was also the same night that Kenny Braverman's mother was in labor in her car, and due to the sort of rocket discharge of the small Superman's rocket, it eventually caused the car that Kenny's mom was in to crash. And so Kenny's mother eventually gave birth to him while she was in the car, and thus he was exposed to all sorts of kryptonite radiation upon being born. So immediately, Kenny was sort of born with very unstable kryptonite-powered super abilities that sort of would turn him into a metahuman. And when Kenny grew up, he grew very close to Clark Kent, especially throughout high school. He was sort of Clark's #1 best friend. But when Kenny was recruited by the CIA in order to examine his body and all the changes it was going through, the CIA found a way to try to use him as a weapon. So they tried to send him on a couple of different CIA tasked assignments and missions, which Clark, as Superman, would end up thwarting. And Kenny, upon figuring out that Clark and Superman were one and the same, would pretty much grow to despise Clark. Now, as stated before, Kenny would actually figure out that Clark was Superman, and upon doing so, he would craft a suit of battle armor that he would use to channel his kryptonite-powered energies into in order to help him regulate his powers a lot better. And he started placing bombs around the houses and residences of all of Clark's old friends, until eventually Kenny managed to trick Clark into waking up into a highly simulated, synthetic, robotized version of Smallville 20 years ago, when Clark and Kenny were basically kids, when they were high school kids. So the Conduit and Superman would have their final battle in the old basketball stadium of the Smallville High School, in which Conduit would pretty much end up dying. And despite the Conduit having such a brief appearance in the Superman comics, I actually think he sort of left a lasting impression. I actually find him to be sort of an underrated character, and one who's not really brought up frequently enough. So yeah, that's about all the info that there is on the Conduit, so I'm going to talk about the other villain. And the second character on this episode is none other than Atlas. Now, there have been two other characters before this one who carried the name Atlas, but the character I will be actually talking about is the Jack Kirby character, Atlas, appearing first in 1975. Now, this Atlas's origin story goes a little something like this. A long time ago, in like a distant fantasy realm, there was a land that was ruled by this really cruel and sadistic reptilian king named Hissa. And Atlas was a child from a place called the Crystal Mountains. And he grew up in a village that was eventually burned down by King Hissa and his men. And Atlas was the last survivor of the village. And Atlas, who wore a crystal from one of the mountains, was rescued by a wise old man named Chegra, who would raise Atlas to become a great hero. And after toppling countless evil, corrupt leaders and fighting various monsters that terrorized all sorts of people, Atlas would finally confront King Hissa himself and murder him. But, unbeknownst to everybody else, after this fight, this would change Atlas into a much more dark and sinister character. And that's all around his origins, pretty much. Now, the original 70s comics that featured Atlas initially had nothing really to do with Superman, but it wasn't until the post-crisis modern New Earth comics when James Robinson brought Atlas into the comics to decide to make him an actual enemy of Superman. In the Superman storyline, simply known as The Coming of Atlas, Atlas was transported into the modern-day metropolis whenever his mentor, Chegra, realized that he had become way too corrupt and evil. So Chegra used the crystal on Atlas's neck to transport him into a completely different time period. And whenever Atlas awoke from the time travel, he would awake in a secret government laboratory where he was being observed by some obscure army general who wanted him to fight and kill Superman. So Atlas believed that he should be the rightful champion of Metropolis, and he then proceeded to fight Superman in a very brutal one-on-one brawl. And then it's eventually revealed that Lois Lane's father, General Sam Lane, is the one responsible for actually bringing Atlas into the modern day and sicking him on Superman. So, long story short, pretty much Atlas and Superman fight to a brutal standstill. Crypto and Steel and even Bibbo and Zatara, they all get involved in this fight, and so it's eventually settled and Atlas is neutralized. But then after this little event, it was sort of made the status quo that Atlas would just sort of remain Sam Lane's hired muscle for any alien threats that he would perceive other than Superman. So, in a sense, Atlas sort of becomes something of a supporting character of Superman, because he would help Superman fight off a few different alien threats like Brainiac or Imperiex or Darkseid or what have you. So Atlas is sort of a character who very much borders on the line between hero and villain, although it's sort of more pointed towards the villain aspect than anything else. But yeah, that's my video on these two fairly obscure one-shot Superman baddies. And I figured I'd do at least one more multi-character oriented video before I get to the big finale. And yeah, you all know what video comes next. So, I hope you all enjoyed my second to last video in the Supervillains Explored Marathon, and I hope you all enjoy my upcoming Darkseid video. I'll see you all then. Later.